Welcome and welcome back, everybody, to the OK Grognard Show. Today is Monday, May 2nd, 2022, 10 a.m. Central in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And we are here on the OK Grognard Show to examine the Dungeon Masters Guide section, specifically on spellcasting. That's right. I've looked at some stuff in and around spells on previous shows, but I'm not sure I ever really touched right on this section. So we're going to have it out, as it were. Hey, shout out to Chet Minton, excellent artist whose shirt I am wearing. Today I will try to get a link up in the show notes for anybody who might be interested in this shirt or just checking out his work in general, because he's a hell of a guy and he's got some really tight old school sensibilities. So there you go. Well, let's jump in because it's a decent sized section here. Spellcasting. I'm going to slide this over to the other screen for me, but look the same to you, I think. All magic and cleric spells are similar in that the word sounds. No, that's not right. All magic and cleric spells are similar in that the word sounds. When combined into whatever patterns are applicable, are charged with energy from the positive or negative material plane. When uttered, these sounds cause the release of this energy, which in turn triggers a set reaction. The release of the energy contained in these words is what causes the spell to be forgotten or the writing to disappear from the surface upon which it is written. The triggering action draws power from some plane of the multiverse. Whether the spell is an abjuration, conjuration, alteration, enchantment, or whatever, there is a flow of energy, first from the spellcaster, then from some plane to the area magicked or enspelled by the caster. The energy flow is not from the caster per se. It is from the utterance of the sounds, each of which is charged with energy, which is loosed when the proper formula and or ritual is completed with their utterance. This power then taps the desired plane, whether or not the spell user has any idea of what or where it is, to cause the spell to function. It is much like plugging in a heater. The electrical outlet does not hold all of the electrical energy to cause the heater to function, but the wires leading from it ultimately to the power station bring the electricity to the desired location. Well, that's a lot to unpack. We're going to read a little more, though, and then look at it in total. Many spells also require somatic motions in conjuration with words. The spoken words trigger the release of the magical energy, and the hand movements are usually required in order to control and specify the direction, target, area, etc. of the spell effects. When spell energy is released, it usually flows to the prime material plane from the positive or negative material plane. To replace it, something must flow back in reverse. The dissolution and destruction of material components provides the energy that balances out this flow, through the principle of similarity. The dissolution and destruction of material components provides the energy that balances out this flow through the principle of similarity. Sometimes this destruction is very slow, as is the case with Druid's Mistletoe, those spells without apparent material components are actually utilizing the air exhaled by the magic user in the utterance of the spell. Release of word / sound stored energy is not particularly debilitating to the spellcaster, as he or she has gathered this energy over a course of time prior to the loosing of the power. It comes from outside the spellcaster, not from his or her own vital essence. The power to activate even a first level spell would leave a spellcaster weak and shaking if it were drawn from his or her personal energy, and a third level spell will most certainly totally drain the caster's body of life. So far, so good? Just one last chunk over here. Because spells tap power from other planes, any improper casting is likely to cause the spell not to function. The heater is turned on, but you haven't plugged it in. Or you've plugged it in, but it is not turned on. Or to malfunction. You held onto the prongs of the plug when you tapped the current, and you accidentally dropped the heater as you were plugging it in, or perhaps you plugged it in some other appliance. You plugged in some other appliance or device by mistake. It's an interesting analogy. Some such happenings are covered in the various chances for spell malfunction. If your players inquire as to how spells work or fail to do so, you can explain without difficulty the precepts of the AD&D magic spell systems. For background reading, you can direct campaign participants to Vance's The Eyes of the Overworld and the Dying Earth, as well as to Belair's The Face in the Frost. So, spellcasting. Pretty simple. Had to create some sort of system by which it would work. It had to make some sort of sense to someone with a even rudimentary knowledge of real world physics, I suppose, if you want it to be a quasi science to be casting spells. I think this is the kind of motivation behind creating this system in this way. Hey, Rick, welcome. Good to see you in the chat there. The spellcasting is, as I say, a quasi-science within D&D. I know a lot of people would just rather hand wave any questions about how it works and say, well, it's magic. You don't have to explain how it works. And I get that. And I think for most campaigns, most games that you might run that are D&D games, first edition D&D games, any edition D&D games, any RPG that includes magic, I think in most of those instances, you could probably just hand wave it and say, well, magic is inexplicable. And that could be taken at face value by most people that play. There's a danger when taking this information here and incorporating it into your game as a sort of a quasi-science, in that this is just a kind of a rough overview, and it can potentially invite deeper questions about how it works and how to deconstruct it so that one can make it work differently as a magic user in a game. And maybe all of that is interesting. And maybe all of that would be a lot of fun to use in a game and make and incorporate as part of the game. But unless every player at the table feels that way, not just Magic users, but anybody who's playing a fighter character, for instance, or a barbarian, thieves, maybe other Magic users who aren't interested in getting that in depth. Um, you might find that a game can get bogged down if you dig too deep into the minutia of how spellcasting actually works on a sort of a metaphysical level. So be careful about that. And I think just hand waving it and saying, well, that's magic. You can't explain how magic works. Nobody really knows. Sometimes that's a way of just avoiding a lot of deeper introspection into how magic works and getting bogged down in within the game. Your mileage may vary, as they say. You might find that you want to take the time as a dungeon master, as a referee, as someone running a game, as a game master. You might want to take the time outside of the game to create a much more elaborate system, either with this at its core or completely of your own design, because this doesn't quite capture what you feel magic should be, how it should run, how it should work. But understand, if you trade out this system, which is at the heart of what Gary was thinking, how it should work, then there may be a sort of a domino effect. There may be other unintended consequences to making changes or adjustments that don't pop up in immediately to you as you're creating it. And the further you get afield from the core of what he was thinking, the greater the possibility that you're going to wind up running afoul of Gary's intentions and find that there are little things inside various spells or the way magic items work in particular that now don't mesh well with the system you've created to replace this one, because it relies heavily on the fact that Gary believed that this would be a good explanation. It relies heavily on positive or negative material plane energy to to charge such items or to be the place whence magic ultimately comes. So I don't know that there's a lot more to say. There's a few people in the chat. Does anybody have any questions about this? Does anybody have any discussion, or are there ways in which you handle magic in your own games that are different from how Gary thought the overarching practice of magic should be? I know that most of the people that I've played under who were DMing, uh, they would go with this method. It's 8242. I try to avoid magic. Yeah, they say the best dice you bring to the table are the ones you never roll. That may extend to magic too. The best kind of magic is the magic that never comes near you. Maybe that's a truism as well. Um, most GMs I've played under, and the vast majority of the time I DM. So most of the GMs I've played under either didn't think much about this or put much stock into it. Rick agrees when when Sarah says too complicated. And I hear you. It can it can be a lot of detail. Most of the GMs, like I say, either kept it to themselves if they made any changes, or added anything to this to make it a deeper quasi science. Then they didn't say anything to me or didn't reveal it in games where I was playing. So it may just be that it never came up, that they gave it some thought. And certainly, there's nothing wrong with giving something like this some thought, so that if a player does bring it up, you've at least had your mind wrapped around it previously, so you're not, completely caught off guard and having to make something up whole cloth that you then have to maybe retract later or amend later so that it fits with what you really feel it should work. Gift of Gabby says, I accidentally started planning a future campaign yesterday. When you say future campaign, do you mean a campaign you'll run in the future rather than a game that takes place in the future? I'm assuming that's what you mean. And yeah, right. When you're planning a campaign or you're thinking, hey, next time I'll run a campaign, and I'd like to incorporate this or that aspect into it, um, you certainly do have a lot to think about. And this can be one of the aspects of it, is how does magic work in this new campaign, in this setting that you're using for the campaign. Gift to Gabby one says, I just had an idea for a cool monster, then that monster turned into a villain, then boop down the rabbit hole I go. Indeed. Um, one idea begets another for sure, and you can certainly spend a lot of time considering how a new campaign can work and what should be in the new setting and different aspects you want to add. And says, "Yep, I will do it in the future." Yeah, yeah. So it's a regular D&D campaign then. What system will you be using to? Will it be 1E, or are you using a different RPG altogether, or a different edition of D&D perhaps? Maybe maybe something of your own design even. Let us know here. Be interesting to find out. The uh, the parameters of any setting can change from campaign to campaign, from game to game. You certainly don't have to always run in the same setting or the same part of the setting, or even have the setting remain primarily the same. It's a psionic hive mind plant. Well, I'm thinking hive mind plant wants approval of its creator, Daddy Ithelid. Yeah, nice. So I've seen some campaigns similar to that. It's the Frankenstein story in a way, right? It's Frankenstein's monster, right? Somebody creates a thing, and that thing is then in need of approval from its creator, and then of course, when it finds out its creator is fallible or not the superior that the creation believed, suddenly shenanigans ensue. Will it go wild upon the world? Will it then need to be reined in? The Ithelid not being the actual villain or enemy in this case of the players, but rather somebody who's in over his head and needs the help from the players to go rein this psionic hive mind plant in. So because I'm most familiar with it, but an old school 5e because I'm most familiar with it, but old school essentials would be cool. Yeah, a lot of people are playing old school essentials. I know Jason Hobbs, runs a regular game in that, and there are legions of people. If I had to guess, how that does. I think it's head and shoulders above most other retro clones by popularity. So you should be able to find a good number of players if you run that system too, which is always useful. Hey, see by the clock on the wall, we're pushing our time limit. It's a shorter show, but within the time frame. Um, I'm not sure what we'll be looking at next time. I do want to say, though, before I go, thank you very much for participating today in the chat and for tuning in, following the channel. Don't forget, we do a summer hiatus in the month of July. I think schedule-wise, I should just look at a calendar while I'm sitting here and talking about it, right? We got May and June, of course, before we even get there. So this is a couple of months away. But there are only 4 Mondays in July this year, starting with the 4th. So we won't do a show on the 4th, 11th, 18th. Maybe I'll just take 3 weeks off, come back on the 25th, and do a pre-Gary Gygax Day show. Like the 27th was Gary's birthday, so Wednesday of July will be a day of celebration. Set up your D&D games. It's kind of neat that the store regularly has an RPG night on the 27th. Perhaps my regular campaign, Sarah, will be back up and running by then. I've heard some rumblings from people that I better get that first edition game going again. So I think we've got 5 or 6, maybe 7 players potentially that want to be in on it. Of course, most of the people, Sarah, that were in on the last version, -1 plus Shane. And then our friend Kim was talking about wanting to get back to the table. We'll talk about it in a Facebook group, work out the details, and see where we're going with it. And it should be a lot of fun. So, all that said, thank you very much for joining us today on the OK Grognard Show. We can shut that up there. Right on. Don't forget the OK Grognard Show streams live on Twitch each Monday at 10 a.m. or thereabouts, soon thereafter, and is then archived on YouTube. If you're checking out the stream on Twitch, please do follow the channel and chime in on the stream chat so that everyone knows you're here and so that I can interact with you a bit during the show. It's always a pleasure to answer questions or to just springboard off of topics. If you're catching up with this on YouTube, by all means, subscribe to the channel, click the little bell so you get updates whenever a new show is uploaded to YouTube, and give us thumbs up on any videos that you watch and enjoy. And of course, feel free to chime in there with comments about the show, whether they're talking about the way the show works or they're on the topic of the show. It's all good. Thanks to our Patreon supporters. Links will be provided in the show notes. Tom Tullis of Fat Dragon Games, Rick Hershey of Fat Goblin Games, Carlos Lysing of Castle Entertainment, Heath Farndon of the AD&D 20, Dave O'Brien of 4 Quacks Games, and of course Shane Bradley, DM Extraordinaire. This has been the OK Grognard Show from beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Bye-bye.